Ebbs here, episode 2 of 15 with Fit, and really excited to welcome on somebody I've been connected with recently and having some great, shop talks with. Currently, minor league strength and conditioning coach in the Boston Red Sox organization, and just a really, really bright mind in strength and conditioning. Dan Rosen. Dan, what's going on, dude?
How you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Appreciate you jumping on. And you and I are going to dive a little bit into something you and I have talked about personally. We kind of refer to it as constraints-based training, right? So kind of a training and programming philosophy that can really help you navigate some challenges in a team environment. Minor league strength and conditioning coach, you guys have some really unique challenges.
Yeah.
Maybe you can actually start off, just talk about like what some of those challenges are, right? It's kind of a unique subset of athletes you work with.
Yeah, and just not only the unique subset of athletes we work with, but like the language barrier. That's like number one right off the bat. Like you got half the guys on a team, especially at the lower levels, that might speak Spanish and their English is spotty. And so that's already like a challenge that we have to overcome as strength coaches and just anybody on staff in general, trying to communicate to the athlete, like the why behind everything, but also how we're going to accomplish it. And then I think also the travel and the resources that you have, like you might go to a middle of nowhere affiliate and the strength and conditioning room, the weight room there is one strength squat rack and a couple med balls, and you got to make do with what you got. So it's not always going to be perfect in minor league ball, and so just having to be really adaptable and kind of working with what you have is a big challenge that you as you go to more places and you have more seasons under your belt, you kind of get the answers and you can kind of predict those challenges ahead of time.
So trying to navigate some of those challenges, you've talked to me about the idea of kind of a constraints-based training model where you're trying to be as detailed as you possibly can and meet the athlete where they're at, but also give them the stimulus that you feel like they need. Let's start with even just the idea of constraints. What are constraints in a training setting, and what's constraints-based training?
Yeah, I think constraints for me, like you learn about it in school, it's like environmental, task, and the individual, all those constraints that kind of lead you or give you more information or things that you can manipulate in a training session to get a desired adaptation. So that's essentially how I view constraints. It's things I can manipulate as the coach within a training session, the variables within a training session that will elicit a desired adaptation for a specific person. For example, like VBT. I might constrain someone to using a faster VBT range so that they are not lifting as heavy, or vice versa. Like I don't want them to take the day off in the weight room, so I might give them a slower VBT range so that they're lifting something heavy. So that's like a constraint right there. Another constraint would be getting someone on the ground to improve their reference points, right? So as I'm on the ground, more surface area is connected to something, and I can better control my body. Versus as we go to half kneeling, there's less reference points to the ground, but still more reference points than something that's standing. So that's like another constraint. If I'm trying to teach someone a specific position or movement pattern, I might start them lower on the ground and then gradually raise them up. So constraints can be, like I said, load, it can be speed, it can be the type of equipment you use, the positioning of the equipment, and then you can keep going. Sets, reps, everything can really be a constraint based on whatever adaptation that you want to get out of the athlete.
Funny, like as you lay some of those things out, I think whether you're a sport coach at the youth level, college level, pro, collegiate performance coach, pro performance coach, like we're using constraints all the time, right? Like think about like a open speed and agility drill where you might be doing it on a command and there's a visual cue or an auditory cue. Like those are constraints. We just don't always think about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
When I was sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there. Like you were
no,
talking about like an open field drill. When I was interning at Elon, the staff there, the football staff, Nick DeMarco, Jordan Newsma, they were really good about constraints-based training in the sense of like an open field agility and just closing distance, opening distance, and the space they let their athletes work within. That was a major constraint. It's like time, how long are we doing this open field drill, and then how much space am I giving them? Are we creating like a 5 by 10 box or a 3 by 6 box, and then gradually expanding that constraint to open up movement options was like something really cool and really pivotal for me to see like right out the gate in my career.
I don't think I've ever even thought about it like this before, but just listening to you talk, it almost kind of closes like the feedback loop a little bit, right? Like, even if it is something like a task constraint, like a box squat, where it's like, well, that box, regardless of how you're trying to use it, it kind of closes the feedback loop a little bit. And
Yeah,
then kind of what you were just talking about, like on field, like you can kind of expand that feedback loop, right? Like as the athlete can take more. Um, Really
for sure.
cool. I want to ask you, you had mentioned previously, like some of the things you might be trying to affect, and you use some examples of velocity and load. What else might you try to affect with like constraint based training? Like, what are some adaptations you might be trying to get?
Yeah, I think one thing that I always try to think about when I'm giving someone a constraint is like, what do I want them to know that we're accomplishing? So, for instance, if I'm trying to get someone to move better, right, and we take a look at their split squat, like a normal split squat, and we identify that their back knee kicks out at a certain depth, I might have them go to an Eric's pad or two. I know for me, for instance, I have to go down to two Eric's pads before stuff starts getting wonky, and so I'm just trying to teach them or show them like, hey, here's the range that you actually have, and we're going to move within this range. Because once we move out of this range, we're not really accomplishing, or in order to accomplish a task, you're going to have to compensate. And so I guess constraints are, for me, like I've said, a way to accomplish a task with the minimal amount of compensations possible, and to serve as almost like as an educational point for the athlete. Like, we're trying to get this adaptation. Here's the constraint that we're using, and here's why this constraint leads to that adaptation.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny. It's like it almost kind of depends on how important something is, right? Like I think if you mentioned like compensatory motion, like if that if that flies up the priority list in terms of like, hey, we need to increase degrees of freedom and increase adaptability, so movement becomes really important. Well, it's like, well, then yeah, those task constraints become really important as well. I know there
Yeah.
have been other times where if you take something a little more traditional, like let's just say like a trap bar deadlift, if we're doing that at high load, high magnitude, it's like, hey, that might not be as important anymore. Let's remove some of those constraints and kind of cut them loose.
Yeah, and I mean something as simple as like a trap bar deadlift, like I can use that same exercise with multiple athletes. But if I have a 6'5" guy and a 5'10" guy, I might lift the floor for that 6'5" guy. I might put it on a couple DC blocks. Or if I have more of an elastic athlete or a narrow athlete, whatever kind of bucket system you want to use, I might tell that athlete, hey, I want you to touch and go rather than reset after every rep, because that's going to be more aligned with a strength of theirs. And it's not going to force them to have to compress from the ground every single time, which a wider, more muscular driven athlete might do. So same exercise, but the constraints of how I coach it or how I tell them to execute the movement, and then also the environmental constraints of lifting the floor or lowering the floor, same exercise, but constraints will dictate how the movement is done and the adaptation again that it will elicit.
You kind of walked me right into the next place too, where it's like, I think you and I have gone through probably a similar evolution as a performance coach. And I think a lot of people go through this where you get new tools that become available to you, and then your training gets more detailed. But as it gets more detailed, different programs get further apart from each other. And it,
Sure.
it becomes really challenging. And the last time you and I talked, you made the point about how your training is actually starting to come kind of back together to the untrained eye, but to the trained eye, there's a lot of nuances in there. Like, can you talk
Yeah.
about the team environment and how you utilize kind of a constraints-based model in a team environment to simplify, but also give the detail that you need?
Yeah, this has been such a learning curve for me, especially because coming to the Red Sox, coming to the team environment, I'd had prior team experience, but I was coming right from Crazy Sports Performance, where individualization is a heavy priority there. Like, right, every athlete comes in, they get assessed, and they get their own program. And so I wanted to bring that kind of programming strategy to the team setting. And what I quickly found out is like, hey, I don't have the time or the ability to individualize effectively. And so I tried to find resources that could help me with that. And Rick Franzball at Clemson, super, super helpful resource. And good thing he's like 45 minutes down the road. I get to go watch, and you can have base template programs, and it's okay. Like, I think athletes at the end of the day care about being coached and less so about knowing that they have some completely individualized program. Because if, like I was just saying, I can individualize a trap bar deadlift even if two different athletes are trap bar deadlifting. So that's like one way. And then the other way is have a bucketing system that works for you, right? Like I was talking about earlier, you can use the narrow wide, aerial terrestrial, elastic versus force driven, whatever your buckets are, great. And then what I would do, or what has worked for me, is kind of create a middle program where like they're not necessarily elastic, they're not necessarily force driven. That's a program for your guys that are kind of in the peak of the bell curve, right? And then you have your widest wides, your narrowest narrows, whatever the extremes are, have a program for those guys as well. And then everybody's going to fall within the middle, and you can just make those individualized constraints based on those guys in the middle. So, for instance, if I have a super wide guy who is really good at lifting heavy, and then someone who's like still kind of wide, muscle driven, but can distribute or showcase some elastic quality, then maybe we're implementing some of that stuff into the program as well, depending on the time of the year, emphasizing strengths and weaknesses. All that to say is have your base program, and then depending on what you feel the guy needs or the discussion that you're having with the sport coaches about what they want to work on with that athlete, then that's where you can individualize constraints or specific exercises for specific guys.
Yeah, I hear like two things kind of embedded in there that I think are really important, where it's like, number one, you can use this philosophy to kind of put the guardrails on certain athletes, right? So like you and I sometimes we've talked about like pressure strategies, right? So if somebody is just not a high level force producer for one of a number of reasons by nature, and we're aware of that, well, it's like, well, let's make sure we keep the guardrails on. Not that they can't work hard, they don't even have to know that, but we're just going to find ways to constrain the drill to keep them in a safe spot. Number one. And then number two is like, this is all within the context of the task, right? Like if you're working with a pitching staff, you got, 18 different pitchers on your staff. You're going to have 18 different strategies to get the ball from A to B, and kind of understanding
Sure.
that a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, for sure.
you said something, and I think this is really important. And this is a little less like nuts and bolts of training, but just a thing that I think a lot of coaches, myself included, that I absolutely struggled with, where you've kind of gotten yourself to this place where you're okay with things like a base training program, or hey, most of the group in front of me is doing the same or very similar things. Like, how did you get yourself to that place? Because I think there's a lot of coaches, especially young coaches, where again, once they acquire tools, you feel like you're not doing your job if you're not being very detailed. Like, what was that process like, and how'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, a lot of like you got to make mistakes to learn from them. And I think one of the big mistakes I made my first year was taking too much time to do that and then realizing, hey, I'm the only coach on the floor here. I got 8 athletes. Half of them don't speak English, so I got to take more time to show them the exercise and let them know how and why we're doing what we're doing. And so 8 different programs at once, 4 guys that I need to spend a little more time with, or this fifth and sixth guy are doing this like very specific exercise where they need to have these reference points and whatever. It's like I just can't be the best coach for all these different guys that need me at the same time. So let me give a base template and then individualize from there the constraints. Like this guy's going to be doing a split squat. This guy's going to be doing a front foot elevated split squat. This guy's going to be doing a rear foot elevated split squat on this side and then a front foot on this side. And like just really knowing your guys and talking to the sport coaches about what they need makes constraints and individualization easier from that base program because you can kind of just say like, hey, instead of a step up on this left side, we're going to do a step down. But we're going to do that step up on the right side because you're a little pulled down on your right side. So like little things like that that don't aren't very like time or coaching intensive, but they make the world of difference in terms of the adaptation that you need for the sport to make them the best athletes possible.
Yeah, and, last one for you. This time goes quick. This is a bonus question for people who've stuck with us. But I think the thing is too is like, it's not just that it's okay to do that, but you even just touched on like extracting value, like a lot of value, where it's like, yeah, we're going to do similar things, but we're going to extract high value out of them. And so on that note, last question for you is like, can you talk about a case where the same drill isn't just okay for multiple people, but it's actually a great solution for multiple cases? Like, just because it's the same thing doesn't mean it's not actually a solution in two different cases.
Yeah, am going to steal something I got. I've never worked with Eric Huddleston, but I heard him talking on a podcast one time, and he was talking about like band assisted jumps. And you might have super funnily guys who have that tight waist, broad shoulders, right? And so if you think of that pressure gradient, they're really good at pressurizing from the pelvis and jumping, right? That's their superpower. They're good at getting vertical. But what sometimes they lack is that ability to yield to increase the amount of potential energy that they can then release. And so a band assisted jump when they land is going to delay the time that they're on the ground, right? So it gives them that yielding capability. Now, when you think about the flip of that, you think of like a pylon. You think of um, somebody who's really narrow up top and super wide hips, right? They're not as good as pressurizing themselves off the ground. They're actually gravity beats these kinds of people, right? So a band assisted jump, yes, it will yield them a little bit, but it makes that yielding, that falling with gravity a little safer because they have the assistance. And then when they need to pressurize themselves back up, the band's there to help them do that as well. Right. So you have band assisted jump for a funnily kind of athlete, and you have a band assisted jump for a pylon kind of athlete, and it's eliciting two different adaptations, but the drill is the exact same.
Yeah, really awesome to hear your process. It's really impressive too. And like, you and I both have connections to Bill Hartman and some of the great coaches who have come from his network, and he'll talk a lot about simple solutions for complex problems. And I think you're kind of a great example of somebody who's putting that to practice in a really tough setting. I got to let you go, unfortunately, but unbelievable to hear from you. This is going to benefit a lot of people, and I can't thank you enough for jumping on for a few minutes, Dan.
Yeah, it's fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, dude.